This might be the most boring document you'll ever read, but it could cost you thousands and wreck your dream home plans. Our office does into the hundreds of closings every month, and we still have 2 or 3 people a month where we get to the closing table and they are completely surprised. So let's talk about covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions are usually abbreviated to cc&rs, so that's what I'm going to call them today. So what are they? Why should you care? And restrictions are the legal instrument that are recorded against real property that limit what you can do with your property. And I know that sounds insane and unfair. Trust me, I hear it at closings every single month and how much people hate HOAs, etc. But you can have restrictions on your property even if you don't have an HOA, and that really surprises some people. The restrictions are usually put in place for good reasons, like keeping home values up and making sure that properties don't fall into disrepair, you don't have unkempt yards, and things that will just generally keep a common scheme of a neighborhood looking good. But it could also regulate certain activities or certain types of vehicles that you can have. It can even regulate the way that your home has to be built, its size, and its appearance. So this is something that's incredibly important. Before you sign a contract, you should review the restrictions. I understand that it's complicated and you might not think that it's important to look at ahead of time, but from personal experience, my husband and I, when we first moved to Mooresville, were looking at building a house in Mooresville. We found a lot. It was great. It wasn't part of a neighborhood, or so we initially thought, but we put in an offer, and once we put in the offer, it got accepted. Then we got the restrictions. Shame on me. I didn't look at them beforehand, but I wasn't a real estate attorney yet, so give me a little bit of grace. And we got the restrictions, I reviewed them, and it said that we had to build a house that was no smaller in size than 4,500 square feet. And guess what? My husband and I could not afford to build a house of that size. We did not want a house of that size. We were looking about 2,300 square feet. So we lost our due diligence fee because we didn't read the restrictions ahead of time. So learn from my mistake. Don't do what I did before I was a real estate attorney and thinking about this stuff all the time. All right, once you get this document or sets of documents, because they can be amended and restated, there's some neighborhoods around here that have 20 different documents that make up their restrictions or even more. So yes, you do have to look at them all, and that can be quite onerous, but when you've got a lot of money on the line, it's important. So what you're looking at in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, you're looking at, are there restrictions on what types of vehicles can you have? Do you have to get architectural review committee approval for any changes you want to make to the house? Are you allowed to have a fence? And if so, what does the material have to be? What height is it restricted to? Are there any restrictions on pets? There are certain neighborhoods that have breed restrictions. They can be challenged, but sometimes they're upheld. So there might be breed restrictions on certain types of pets that you can bring. Almost all restrictions say you can't have exotic pets. So if you have exotic pets, you're going to want to make sure that where you're moving allows that. And a really big one, perhaps you're moving into this house for your primary residence, but it's your starter home, so to speak, and you plan to move in 2 or 3 years, but you want to keep your house and rent it out. Are you allowed to do that? There are rental restrictions, and those are increasingly common in neighborhoods because they want to make sure that you own the house for a certain amount of time before you rent it out, because they want to preserve the nature of this being a residential, non-transient neighborhood. Or it might be that you can only have leases that are a certain length of time. Sometimes they're a minimum of a 1-year lease, so you can't lease for shorter amounts of time than that. There are also sometimes restrictions on the percentage of homes in the neighborhood that can be rented at any given time. So if more than 20% of the houses are rented out, doesn't matter, you're not allowed until under that percentage gets rented out, and then you can ask the HOA for permission. So that tends to be a really big one, especially if you're trying to buy the property for rental purposes in the beginning. So don't go under contract unless you know for sure that you can rent the property the way that you want to. This also applies to short-term rentals. In the area where we live, they're extremely popular on the lake. So you've got to make sure that you can do short-term rentals as well if that's something that you really want to do, and you find that out from the restrictions. The other thing you're going to see in the restrictions, if not the exact HOA amount, the way that it's calculated. You'll be able to tell in there how frequently are HOA dues assessed, when do you have to make the payments, are there allowances for special assessments to be made. Let's say there's a neighborhood playground and the HOA reserves the right to assess against all the owners for the maintenance of the playground or upgrades to the playground. Same thing for a common area like a pool. Those restrictions will let you know what additional costs you may be on the hook for going forwards that are over and above your monthly or semi-annual HOA dues. Another thing these cc&rs are going to tell you is whether your HOA has the right to place a lien on your house for unpaid dues or for, let's say, you're not mowing the lawn in your neighborhood. And does the HOA have the right to do it for you and charge you for it? And if you don't pay that, they can put a lien on your house. There's all sorts of things that the HOA might gain the right to put a lien on your house for. And if that happens, and you get a properly placed lien on your house from the HOA can get the right to foreclose on your property. And I've even seen in closings where sellers are dealing with foreclosure from an HOA, and oftentimes it's because they got a fine against them that they didn't agree with, and rather than paying it or fighting it, they just ignored it until the HOA finally sued and placed a lien and sued for foreclosure because they didn't get paid the fine. And the fines can have interest or penalties, so something that is as simple as a $100 fine could end up to be in the thousands really quickly if you ignore it. The cc&rs, the restrictions, it's going to tell you whether that's possible, and if there's escalations for fines, say first offense is lower and the second offense is more, and so on and so forth. But any of those things that are unpaid or unaddressed could turn into a lien on your property, and we have people that don't understand that or don't know that. A big red flag to watch out for buyers, kind of dependent upon the buyer and their desire for free use of their property. So if you are someone that does not like having to answer to anyone for anything, restrictions are probably not for you. So at minimum, you're probably not going to want to go into a neighborhood with an HOA unless that HOA has very simple rules that you don't have to seek anyone's permission for modifications to your home. But you also need to look, even properties out in the, so to speak, country can have restrictions on them, and those could be placed by deed. There could be people back in your chain of title that had a clear vision for what they wanted for their family's property, and they've said, oh, well, you can't, maybe you can't put mobile homes on the property, or maybe you can't have livestock on the property. So you really need to be looking at anything that interferes with something you want to do and consider that a red flag, and it might be time to move on to looking at different properties before you get in too deep and you'll lose money for having to back out of a contract. And I understand these documents are dense. This is where a real estate attorney comes in. Agents can also provide value here by sharing what they know about the HOA, putting you in contact with whoever is running the HOA, the management company, etc., getting copies of rules and regulations. But if you have questions about the legal effect of something or the legal meaning of something, this is where a real estate attorney is extremely helpful. It is not uncommon that we will have people contact us for consults where they want us to go through restrictions with them before they've even gone under contract on a property. And we have had many a buyer say, okay, well, based on my reading of this and understanding it and getting some legal advice, I understand this is not the property for me. And we've also had just as many buyers understand after getting that advice, okay, I can do what I want to do here, and I'm comfortable moving forward with the offer or trying to get under contract on a house in this neighborhood. I have a discussion about a really specific example with cc&rs, and if you want to watch that video, it's right here.